Hey there. We're back live drawing with Stillfleet Studio with Ethan Gouldini. What's up, Ethan?
Oh, hi there. How you doing?
I'm all right. Just excited to see some live drawing. Uh,
Yeah.
mm,
This is very exciting. My wrist and forearm seem to have healed finally, so I'm very excited to not be kind of in pain while I'm drawing. It's really nice. It's a real nice
nice.
not having distractions and being able to do the thing that I do best, and probably also is what caused the injury in the first place, which is extremely rapid fire cross hatching and ideation. Um, with drawing, you're supposed to be working from your shoulder and your lower back or upper back more than your wrist. I find sometimes with um, speed drawing, I end up doing a very tight wrist motion, which helps me get extremely fine lines. And I have to remind myself that digitally, that's not necessary because I'm not drawing in a tiny moleskin compulsively like I normally do. But we learn, we grow, we move on, and we heal our wrist thanks to some physical therapy goo gauze made out of silicon.
Nice. Well, thanks to the
Yeah.
therapy goo gauze. Cool. So today, yeah, we'll be doing some more work where we sort of watch you work, just peek over your shoulder, hovering over the art director style. And in this case, I think we talked about maybe you were gonna sort of pick a specific encounter. I think that we were gonna talk about how you
Yeah,
how you visually design encounters, right?
it's fun. Yeah, so the Sometimes Kingdom, where the default state of anything given enough time is alive. The people in it are very accustomed to dealing with a certain level of animated weirdness, which means that encounters are, I think we talked about this last week a little bit, where, you know, sometimes the reason that they're encounters and they're dangerous is because their political alignment might be dangerous and sucky. And sometimes it might be that they're a familiar creature who's aligned to something that's opposed to your goals. But then if something has to be like a monstrosity, like what would something need to be classified as a monstrosity in a world where, demons and skeletons and giants and, all that stuff are they're card carrying union members. They have the vote. Everybody is more or less at parity and peace with each other, with you know political fracases and fraught stuff and all that stuff, which makes the world feel lived in and real. Um, so I was thinking, going through these things, I'm just trying to think about like taking it, maybe trying to start putting a little bit more emotion and putting a little bit more characterization in some of these guys. So I think right now, I'm going to focus on a creature called the forest shark, and then probably from there move on to more humanoid encounters. But a forest shark sounds like a pretty great place to start,
Yeah.
because what is that? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows yet, and then
Nobody
they're gonna know, and they're
knows.
gonna be interested
It's going to
because
be,
we've told them.
yeah.
Cool. So Forest Shark sounds like a good place to start. So this will be one of the encounters for the Sometimes Kingdom RPG, which the rulebook there's an early access version on itch and TTRPG and our website, and we're hoping to print some sort of not quite a quick start, more like a shorter full version of the game, so you could just pick it up and play. And we obviously need encounters. So you and I have been working on kind of the rules and thinking through the logic of, to your point, what kinds of things are quote unquote bad or you might fight or interact with in a mechanically interesting way. If not to the death, then some sort of contest of wills. And that everything has magic of some kind. So who has spells? What level of intelligence is what kinds of intelligence do different beings have? So this is something that in this very very high fantasy game we've kind of had to think through, and I think it's been fun to work on that with you. But yeah, most of the art I think has been sort of before we mechanicalized encounters. So now it's sort of going back and saying, okay, well, what do these things look like? So definitely makes sense today to talk about sort of your process when you have an idea, and you got to only have so much room to draw, especially in a smaller sort of intro version. Hopefully, we'll do the full book box set type launch maybe next year, and a lot of that, a lot of our planning right now is spoiler if you're not if you're new to RPGs and tabletop games, it's all up in the air due to tariffs. So we'll see exactly when
Womp
some of these
womp.
products get made. But before then, anyway, you still have to draw a bunch of stuff. So why don't you walk us through it? How do you go from, okay, I have a name for a thing, we have some stats, it's basically a generic, as close in this world as you're going to get to like generic bad guy, right? This isn't that
Yeah.
complex of an idea. it's a thing that runs around the forest. It might bite you. You might have to at least sort of shove it away. How do you go about drawing that? And I see you're doing sort of what look like to me sort of thumbnail sketches.
Yeah. So that's something I've been thinking more about. Like, so for something like that's more like you know, a beastly sort of thing. It's, I'm gonna cheat and it's gonna be really sharky. Why not just be on book with something like this? But in terms of designing it, there's kind of like two sort of steps that I find the most helpful. One is I'm not going to do a full character sheet for this guy because I know how to draw a shark. Um, but typically, there's two steps for designing something that's like a person that's animated, or in the case of the Sometimes Kingdom, many possible things that it could be animated. Um, Someone would start with just like a character sheet where I sort of like knock in the general, like, okay, well, what's its anatomy? What's its physiology? What are some shapes and silhouettes that would make it sort of fun and interesting? Like, keep it a little bit sharky, but like, this might not be a literal shark. This might be a thing that they're calling a shark. Because maybe it's in the same, classification schema as one. Like maybe it evolved from one, or maybe they're just like, yeah, it has a giant row of teeth and it swims through moss, so it's a shark. It's trying to eat you as a carnivore. Um, just thinking about the sideways profile of a creature is a really easy way to start thinking about anatomy and especially with a fantasy character, you want to like have a hint of whatever it's called or whatever you want it to be. So in this case, I'm sort of like riffing on sharkness. I'm keeping the snoot. I'm keeping the beady eye. It might have more eyes. Um, extra eyes is like a real. Not only it's a great constant in Stillfleet and also in genre fiction in general. I always love the joke about like, oh yeah, X, Y, and Z. It's got 3 arms, 6 eyes. You've seen this kind of squirrel before. They're just normal.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense to say it doesn't have to be a shark, but that's one place to start, obviously, and then you can kind of morph its morphology. So you can say, let me draw a shark, but start playing around with specific elements. And I think that's where a lot of us who just like doodle would probably start with a monster like this, right? Is you're working with it's interesting how that level of game design mirrors the experience of the player. So when you hear the locals tell the PCs, oh, there's a game shark, before a shark on the loose, rather. You probably are imagining basically a shark right away, just the way like language works. But then as time goes on, you can kind of fill in those details, and that's a joke we love to do in designing the monsters in Stillfleet. Has been really fun to say like, oh yeah, it's a squirrel. Squirrels, they have like lots of little chitinous limbs and razory pincers, and just kind of take the initial experience of the player farther and farther away from what that word sort of naturally means. It's kind of a technique like in literature that's called defamiliarization or alienization, and in poetry, Martian poetry. And I think that there's a nice Martian poetry with let me draw a shark and then let me start to whether it's like grabbing and messing with in Photoshop or just kind of drawing more eyes. It's like changing one element at a time until it's sort of further from normal shark, and it's closer to this kind of magical, maybe it's from like magical pollution, whatever. It's this like being that runs around the forest. Which also we didn't all these tropes. I should shout out as like the in terms of somebody who's played old school D&D. Like we're aware of like the bullet in D&D. Like the land shark is not a tradition we came up with. It's just it's a
Yeah.
it's a
This
cool
is not.
idea.
Yeah. Like I think part of it is also like I am frightened of deep water, even though I scuba dive. It's just something I deal with, honestly. Like it's like going on a roller coaster sometimes. It's like I'm pretty sure this parrotfish is, or like this trout, if it's like freshwater, like I'm fairly certain it's not going to kill and eat me. Um, but it's a shape in the dark and some sort of primordial element sort of comes up. So like I've only seen a shark in real life a couple of times, and they are terrifying. I am genuinely scared of sharks, but like I'm also fixated on them because they're scary, And then like there's a fun kind of two-step process of doing that where it's like as an artist you're trying to like both like get into that mindset of like, well, what is it that I'm afeared upon? And it's like the two options are like, well, I want to become more familiar with it. I want to know about a shark. I want to learn about a shark so I'm less scared of a shark because I'm not going to find a shark in the bathtub or the pool, or odds are not like doing a polar bear run at Coney Island. So you're trying to familiarize yourself with it to like make it a little bit less frightening if it's a phobia or whatever. But at the same time, you also like you're trying to like, well, maybe I just want to scare myself more. Like, what would be even like, what if I was right about a shark? What if they could just come out at any moment? Like it's the land shark joke from SNL.
It's
So
the
you're sort
Spanish
of just trying to,
Inquisition, really. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You're oh god, like it's like Final Fantasy, like the squid's gonna come out of the, oh god, I remember that squid. Now he's in the opera house. Why is he in the opera house? This goddamn squid's following me everywhere. So you can start imagining like, oh well, and this is where players always shine because it's like, is there a specific giant like forest shark? Is one of them like a D monster, which is a vocation you can be in the game to fight monsters as a merchant of fortune. Um, is there a forest shark that is somebody's white whale that they're constantly trying to hunt? Or do most people think that they're just kind of goofy? It's like, if you just leave them alone, they're actually more scared of you than they are of them. So like all that stuff, I feel like is extra like lore and stuff that I would have as like, potential options for like a GM who wants to put a forest shark in like the forest of Brucey in spring. Um, or like, a winter shark would be way different than a spring shark would be way different than an autumn shark. Um, so right now, for just sort of thinking about the sharkness, I'm trying to sort of ride the goofiness of it a little bit. I've changed the mouth to be a little bit more of a grouper. I think that like the shark nose is such a prominent, iconic thing, and that's the thing that like really gets it sharky. And I'm really pushing it more into fish territory. And I'm giving it more of a snaggle mouth because it's like, this is a guy who like really enjoys hunting you. It's not just like a senseless beast. It's like maybe he or they really, they just love killing. Um, if they have the drive for or the appetite for a monstrosity where it's like plays with food, then it's more like a cat. Um, it's got its fin up, so it's not domesticated. And then I've truncated the body a lot. So at this point now, like I don't think I like this little tiny guy here, but I really like the head. So no matter what, I think this is the final head. If it's a moss shark, then there's got to be like a opportunity for like, okay, well, physiologically, is it made out of shark? Is it meat, or is it an enchanted like? Is it a piece of land that thinks it's a shark? Um, that's the sort of fun and peril of high fantasy I find, where it's like, well, anything could be anything, um, which is awesome, but it also can be kind of paralyzing. So like this is the sort of step to just like make some decisions. You can always do a variant later. Right now, just sort of like trying to make this is going to be the definitive standard default uh, forest shark. I think I like these guys here. Sort of misaligned
Yep.
the yeah. So I think there's some good stuff to work with here, and that's good enough. Um, Over here, I was thinking about more interesting ways to present it. So at the very beginning of this conversation, I started putting together thumbnails before I even had the physiology of it, to show
Well,
it
what
sort
are
of like,
these since they're more abstract? Is this showing kind of
yeah.
motion or how it
So this is
emerges from the
more,
forest
this is,
floor or something?
yeah. So this would be the forest floor, and then there'd be the sharky shark going through the forest like so. And it would be like undulating through the water, except it's not water, it's grass. Um, this would be one where it is just simply coming out, it's a sideways profile, and it's attacking. And then maybe, if it's like a thumbnail, there's like an encounter, there's a fighter already there who's been completely surprised or they're prepared for it uh, as it leaps out of
Would you ever
the grass.
do like the quarter page, concept art of the monster, and then these little thumbnails, maybe like black and white or just like line work where it's really not meant to be, it's meant to be a sketch. And we've talked about this to some degree, although we haven't pulled it through in Stillfleet as much. But maybe for Sunrise Kingdom, it makes sense to have both. So you can have the sort of finished art, and then you can also have the sketches parading along, because the whole theme visually is to have a lot of annotation and show kind of showing the homework, the constant ideation of what even is this world and how it is kind of imaginal. It's queuing up that it's coming from someone's kind of notebook. So I think it would make sense to have the little sort of almost like flip book, storyboard frames.
Yeah, I like that. Already now there's 3 triptychs I like here. I mean, if this one does not have its snarl, you can also imagine these as like, oh, the 3, the 3 potential positions of a, if we were just talking about like an upcoming print product for the Sometimes Kingdom coming out in 2026, the beginning of it, that would be for the sake of brevity and also keeping it more diegetic, like if it's more like a field guide. So you can already imagine making use of like this sort of early work. You can probably pretty quickly be restructured exactly like you're saying, where it's like, oh, part 1, it's undulating, it's scouring, it's looking for food. 2, like, massive attack. And then for me, the one that would be in a weird way like more frightening, even though it's sillier, would be it doesn't actually swim through the ground at all. It's just sort of decided it's going to swim through air. So it's a forest shark because it's a shark that swims through the forest, not necessarily so literally in the ground. So like these could, to your point, be potential variants as like if you're in your encounters in the forest of Brucey, like watch out for these 3 potential things. And then it's also fun because that then winds up not only being a fun visual, it is really imaginative for the players. It teaches them about the game and it teaches the GM like what are some of the possibilities for it. So it does like kind of quadruple duty all at once. Plus the work's already done.
Although I would say,
ideated.
but then from a design perspective, you also have to figure out, okay, well, are the rules like it? Does how it move affect anything, or is that a narrative note?
Right.
And I
That's a
think
very good point.
you could go either way, but you could imagine just variants where it just says, okay, well, if this and that, if it's able to do this, then it gets advantage on ambushes or something, and basically
Yeah.
just think through the logic of like the full design of the encounter, which is not about the art, if that's fair to say. It's not that the art isn't important, but it's about the player experience. And is this something
Right.
with stakes? Is this something meaningful they can interact with in the world of the game? So I think to that, it is, because in my mind, I definitely imagine more like the bullet or bullet, however it's supposed to be said, like a big ass shark with legs. But this is more magically like a shark that's swimming around magically, basically, right? That's the kind of
Yeah.
vibe I'm getting right now.
Yeah. A leg shark to me is a totally different, like, that's like the maybe there's like a super rare variant of it, like in it's achieved bipedal sapience, like on the westernmost shores of Interheart, the Winter Island, and it's it's a very small community of monstrous bipedal sharks that fishes the water. People don't know that much about them.
They're an endangered species or whatever.
They're
Bipedal
an endangered species, but they're also who knows where the next 1,000 years will take them. They stick it out, they might reach parity with people too, or hunt themselves to death.
Got it. So yeah, I think that's I think that's just an interesting question overall, is like what comes first, in that I think in this case the encounters have so far been sort of a list of they're a list of words, basically strange sounding words, right? And then now you're kind of doing the ideational work of like filling that in with like, okay, what do those things look like? Starting with sketches. But it's funny that, yeah, I mean, in a way, even though you're very visually inclined, it seems like a lot of this is coming the way more, and maybe it's my influence on the game, but just kind of writing lists of stuff like, well, we'll need of this, we'll need of that. There's got to be this kind of encounter, like, ooh, that sounds fun. Say that one more time. What was that one thing you threw at us when, as a GM, right? When I've been playing the game, and I'm sort of trying to take notes on like, okay, how do you turn this into a rule book, right? So it's kind of interesting working backward, which is very much to me that's how I did Stillfleet too. It was like I'm GMing stuff and then working backward from sort of my notes as a GM. In this case, it's the same, except you're the GM. So we kind of taking, this approach of, you've listed monster names. Okay, we can imagine that in play. But it's funny, in my mind, this thing always had legs, and now I'm like, oh, it doesn't have legs. So it's like it's not a problem, not a problem. But it's funny
So
to
funny.
just to hear your kind of version of like really playing with concepts in a similar way. I think okay, what is a shark? What about a shark do I want to draw? What about a shark do I want to move away from or change? Even if it's a subtle alteration, like you're saying, the mouths of different kinds of fish. the size, kind of playing with scale. So, okay, so talk us through, so what's next? So now you have basically a concept and you have little thumbnails for kind of how this thing could look in other illustrations. What's next when you're headed toward, okay, 1/4 page, it's in the book, it's the thing when people flip through, they're like, ooh, that's a monster, clearly, right? Like we've talked about before with D&D, there's some of the appeal is like, I can kind of grok right away as I'm flipping through a book. What character can I be? What monsters can I hit with a sword? Which is very stupid, and obviously our games militate against a little bit, but there's still an element of that stupidity that's super fun, and we also want to provide. So.
Yeah, it's this like that's sort of like that buckethead kind of like, if you that's partly why I like including stuff like this in a game, because truth be told, there are certain elements to combat in games. It's like one of the only places where it's like okay to have combat. So like a certain kind of stylized violence is one that I always, truth be told, enjoy in a game, despite it, to your point, being deeply dumb. And sort of like, I don't know, stuff like this kind of helps me. You want to have your cake and eat it too, because you're like, I want to take the piss out of it a little bit, but it's like, oh man, like if that shark attacks, we're gonna all see what happens. If an unnatural is with the party, then maybe they'll recognize that it's an endangered species, and you should just leave it alone. But or they can do a check on its biology and know a weakness. But if you're just a person, straight out of Midnight with an axe, like you might just immediately start combat. So in terms of what would happen next for this, I think I would make a decision. Really, the only big decision here is if for the encounter tab, is it going to be a 1/4 page illo with an interesting like encounter, or is it going to be straight up like know your animal? I feel like from an encyclopedic perspective, from a bestiary, which is like a form that I just totally love, it would basically be a selection between like a finalized version of this, or it would be one of these guys. I think for now, I really want to focus on what makes it foresty, so I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to finalize what its biology looks like, what it looks like, what are some changes that I want to make to it. The more I think about it, the more I want it to be, you're just not quite sure, is it a shark? Is it a clot of like moss and forest, or, is it using it as a, camouflage? So right now it's almost like I'm gonna make sure that this sort of like know your shark kind of thing is as interesting as I can make it, while still being in quotes like realistic and in quotes helpful. So I've taken the parts that I like the most and I've sectioned them out, and I'm probably just gonna figure out a more interesting way to connect them. I think I want to fix the fin a little bit, and then from there I'll like blow it up and I'll start do foresty details on that, which sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. So basically, you often, it seems like, again, correct me if this is wrong, I'm just narrating through. It seems like you're doing sort of sketches, and then you're taking the kind of winning sketch or whatever that you want to be the illustration in the book, and then in a way redoing it, but also as you go, making kind of rapid adjustments. And then I imagine at some point you'll be adding layers like color, fill. This is something we've talked through with different illustrations for different books, but I think it'll be fun to have this little library, and a little bit of a how-to. Maybe we can come back to that and think through sort of the advice part more specifically in the future.
That's a great idea. That would be super fun.
Yeah, and with all the artists, maybe we can even do like a super cut, like like a nice little video that's like, how do you get started on drawing monsters in fantasy and in sci-fi kind of worlds? That might be a fun piece. But for now, yeah, we're just kind of watching you work, so there's no pressure there.
A little bit whale sharky, which I think I like.
Yeah.
Just this part right here looks a little bit too. It's funny because it is like, I think going through this process, what is the term, A/B testing, when you do with advertising, where you like
you test different messages or different images. Yeah.
For something like this, for concept art illustration, which I guess this technically is, you're sort of running, when you're working with somebody else, then you're sort of like, oh, art director or game runner or whoever is commissioned it like weighs in, and they make the decision. So you give them a couple of elements to make a decision from. when you're doing something like this, you're kind of A/B testing yourself. You're just sort of like what your feelings are. You're like, I don't like that shape. I don't like this thing. Or like, ooh, that's an element that I really want. So like, you have to really get, and this took me way too long to learn. My biggest advice would be, um, your dislike of something when you're doing it and frustration that it's not looking right is actually a really powerful tool. It's not a mistake. An error is like, oh, well, I'm working on a finalized piece and it's not coming out right, so I've got to erase it. But that's like super duper great that your like brain is telling you like this shape isn't working, fix the shape. You tried something, you got a strong no signal, and then you move on. It took me a really long time to learn that because I was a perfectionist for kind of all the wrong reasons. Perfectionism is a real big problem in art, especially if you're ideating.
Well, I think the same with writing, and it's very different. I think it has more to do with maybe scope or the terror of like, oh, I wrote a dope sentence. Oh no, a novel is 300 pages, and there's like different issues with sort of get it crossing the finish line with art and words, but maybe some similarity in terms of it's easy to get dissuaded and say, I took a wrong turn at some point. I know that. I'll just give up, versus, okay, I took a wrong turn at some point. I'm going to kind of work backward until I can satisfyingly, you know what I mean? Figure it
Yeah.
out. Right? There's a puzzle solving element that I think is fun with writing, and game design I think is really great for that because you can, you're basically constantly coming up with ideas, but because there's real constraints on what a tool that other people can use and make sense of, could ever be, because they can't be in your head. You also have to constantly backtrack and say, okay, well, that it's a fun idea, but like it doesn't really make sense, or like it worked well with my friends at the table, or whatever it is. It sounds good on paper, but it doesn't. Thinking through the logic of it, it sort of muddies the waters. So it's going to be different than drawing with your hand, but I think throughout game design, there's a kind of self-checking in process that it can be dissuasive, but ideally it's not. Ideally, it's a source of sort of fun problem solving would be how I would describe it. I don't know if that sounds
Well,
similar to
I
you,
like
but
it.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one of the biggest challenges for me is, um, having ADD. It makes certain parts of this process super easy and actually like easier, I think, than other people. And there's parts of it I think that are much harder. For me, like in a process like this, like I would rather spend time poring over shark data in my spare time and learn lots of shark facts and like doodle sharks so that later I would just know what a shark is. Because like right now I'm not working with reference. If this were going to be like a full color illustration, or like a part of it is the economics of like, oh, well, if I'm spending 6 hours on this because like I'm going to be drawing this viciously attacking somebody in a chapter header, like then I would like be like, okay, well, I'm going to go to all my reference files and actually like look more at sharks to get it, better. For me personally, like this process is way more fun if I like just come at it with shark facts in my head. Um, so that's sort of like you're in this weird process of like, I don't know, collaging together your knowledge on something. Um, when oftentimes like really just like opening up a file or opening up Google and finding sharks, or I literally have pictures of sharks that I've taken. Um, but I'm not using that right now because I just kind of want to see what my brain comes up with beforehand. If this were like a larger piece again, or it's like if this economically like needed to allocate more of my time to it, then I'd probably get the wherewithal to suck it up and be like, yep, time to get shark stuff out. Time to get shark stuff out.
Taylor in the chat, hey Taylor, what's up?
Hey
Asks
Taylor.
Ethan, favorite shark fact.
Favorite shark fact. Um, I love the fact that I don't think that they're functionally immortal, but some of them have been swimming for a long time. I think one of the oldest sharks was 300 years old because they're angiogenic inhibitors. Something in their cartilage allows them to renew. And you know what? I feel like part of it is like they're very strong-willed. They just wanna keep going. Why would you not want to be an apex predator in the ocean? So like, well,
Yeah,
I'm gonna take care of myself. I'm gonna eat right. I'm gonna, you
just
know,
like United States senators, but um,
oh,
yeah, but
topical.
no, it's
What
true.
a grim week. Yeah.
Oh yeah, horrible
No,
news all
real,
around.
real.
Sharks though,
Yeah. Sharks though. Sharks are great. Yeah. I feel
respect.
like gotta, when the world gets really stupid and grim, that's really when like, oh boy. really kind of shine on the monsters because I'm just getting some aggression out.
What the world needs now is
More
sharks.
sharks.
Just more sharks. Yeah.
Sharks to make our leaders question whether maybe they should just retire because the sharks are
Yeah.
going to eat them. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Those
send
are the
sharks
guys.
after them. It'll be like a purge thing, but with flying
Like
sharks with
street
multiple
sharks.
rows of eyes, like they're multiple rows of teeth.
Speaking of special interests, has anybody seen the show Street Sharks from the 90s?
Oh wait,
That's
that's their like really big shark-headed
yeah, they're really big
muscle
shark-headed people.
men.
Muscle. Yeah, they're like hot like himbo sharks that live in probably California. I don't know. It'd be great if they're just like in Wisconsin or someplace totally inappropriate. That's a everybody was trying to capitalize on the Eastman and Lair. That was like what was it? Just everything. Weird. Speaking of anthropomorphic animals, shark with feet versus not. Fun fact: there was a really great hoax where people Bernstein. I forget who. I actually think I know somebody who knew the person who did it. They put together a fake Street Sharks character and then put together a fake wiki and inserted it into the real wiki. And for a long time, people swore that, of course, they remember that character. Of course, they remember that
Right.
shark
They
episode.
Mandela effect.
Yeah,
Well, let's
Mandela
go
affected
through
people.
the Bolton family of street sharks. This is just according to Wikipedia, so some of this might be Mandela affected. But
Oh
the
my God.
characters on the show are so I remember the show, but I don't remember a single fact about it. Just that it was himbo like bodies with
Yeah.
giant shark heads just walking around.
Yeah.
So the characters are Ripster, Jab, Streaks, Big
Yeah.
Slamoo, and Dr. Robert Bolton and Sir Thomas Bolton,
Dr. Robert Borton is the most
or
fierce shark of all.
Sir
Uh,
Shark-a-Lot.
Sir
There's a
Shark,
time
yeah.
travel plot.
Gotta have a time travel plot.
Yeah. There's a place
Incredible.
called Fission University. The president of the United States is a major character. So this, I have not seen the show since 1994, but now I like definitely, I don't want to watch a lot of it, but I want to watch a
Shouldn't watch
supercut.
it. Where Angels Fear to Tread.
There's a circus performer named El Sordo,
I
who
love
is
it.
presumably like a sort of luchador coated like guy with a sword. So really, this is the IP that we should have been licensing all
We
along
should have
with them,
been
I think,
listening to
to,
this
yeah.
whole time.
Who
Yeah. How do
doesn't
you?
want to see just big old sharks punching each other instead of biting?
Yeah, it's like what is it? Basically, what if the Red Hot Chili Peppers were a shark found family? Like that's basically that show.
Oh, this is great. Also, it was later retitled Dino Vengers featuring street sharks, and then it's led
Oh,
to
that's so
spin-off
rough.
Extreme
So bad.
Dinosaurs. So it became less about sharks and more about,
More bad. They are
Paleozoic
prehistoric.
reptiles.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
boy, that's rough for them. I hope their agent like got them participation after the name change. That's rough.
Yeah, they
Guys,
were
dinosaurs are hot
extraterrestrial
now.
dinosaurs.
Yeah.
This is so fun. All of this makes no sense. So they're extraterrestrials, but also dinosaurs. Anyway, it actually does bring me back to. I mean, that feels like the kind of thing that this sort of genre hybridization, the genre in a blender. Are you making a smooth, gastrique? Or are you making a rough like salsa that people do with game design, right? So okay, well, we want a shark and it's magical. How much of a real shark is it that's just flying, basically, versus as you went, I even heard you say like, okay, and maybe it's actually just made of the forest, so it's a little less of a real shark in the sense of a fish, and it's a fish shaped thing that can bite you. And again, that kind of metaphor, like maybe we don't say, it's just you get a very brief description and copy, and you get one image, and GMs will take it in whatever direction they take it. So
Yeah. So like
from
right now with
yeah,
developing shape language, like out of these two shapes, I've sort of I think I've hit on the rootiness of it. I think it's gonna have a tail that's like a gnarled knob, and it's like is shark is tree unknown. I changed the angle of the snout a little bit, and I added some superfluous fins. It's so funny because I feel like I squished it up just to see how goofy it would look, and I think I actually like the silhouette of it a little bit better. It's like this is interesting, but there's like a strong divide between this shape and the front area. And the goofy one, I think, actually captures a little bit more of it. I might take the goofy one and then add a little bit of this guy. And again, it's like who would possibly care about stuff like this, like outside of the artist. But like eventually, like these little decisions wind up mattering. which is always both
Yeah.
surprising and delightful / annoying.
Ethan, can you zoom in a little just so we can see more
Sure.
of your artboard, more of the art on the artboard? Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. And I notice you also have a lot of extra, like, there's a lot of line work going on that to me suggests kind of kinetic motion and also maybe grass, leaves falling off the thing. Is that true? Is that part of, is that more for your sort of concept of it's not necessarily a shark as much as a shark made of stuff? Or is that just like a byproduct of how you draw? Like, I'm just curious kind of again how your
Yeah.
process works.
It's funny. It is a byproduct of how I draw that I've sort of adapted. It seems to be, I learned this when I was doing study abroad. I did study abroad in Florence, and I wound up getting a pretty decent, you know, I would say like just like classical art, like info dump education very quickly. Because I did not major in art in undergraduate. And I think that like I found out that those scribbles were a thing that I just did. And over time, I think that I started adapting this idea of like it is really good at like depicting certain kinds of bioorganic ideas. It works for like all the things that I like rust and moss and ruins and caves and grottos and old things and rags. So I just sort of kept it around because it just seemed I was naturally inclined to do it when I'm drawing things. I think part of it is just keeping my hand busy. But then I wound up like that's a real chicken and egg question of like, did I adapt my style to it, or did I just wind up like liking it so much because I like all the things that it represents? Um,
Yeah,
it
so it's
you
a
know
kind of
it
floating signifier art-wise, where
yeah
it can mean anything, and in a given context, the reader viewer kind of fills it in. They're like, oh, well, obviously in this context it means X. But what that means is there can be happy accidents. So okay, they think it's a shark and it's like seaweed, but then as they're reading, they're like, oh no, it's flying through a forest, or you've given other context clues. There's conifers in the background or something. So yeah, you can sort of imagine that in the rapid ideation, you're drawing a lot of these things at once. That yeah, just the I know we have to talk about greebling, which is a great word you taught me.
yeah
Can do a lot of double duty or do some fast sort of world building work there.
yeah our friend Helen actually I think is the one who told me about the word greebling, or maybe I saw it in a wiki. Greebling is referring to it's a sci-fi modeling thing that was used, and now it's still I think used even with CGI. But the idea was basically like taking pieces and making a complex pattern just to fill in a space, and it's a real classic way to like do sci-fi kitting when you're doing models. And nowadays, you can create a procedural algorithm and that'll do it. You could do it in ZBrush or any sort of things. But like, I just like it because it's a fun word, and it really like it's one of those words that sounds like what it is, which is like, I hate a vacuum, and people are gonna want to see detail, and I want to see detail. So time to greeble. And organic greebling looks very different than sci-fi greebling. Um, like, I feel like one of the reasons I like fantasy so much is that it sort of lends itself to this kind of like schmutzy, scribbly drawing that I seem inclined to do already. If this were a piece of fine art and not a drawing illustration, I would probably not define a lot of the stuff, or I would try and create like cues to deliberately confuse it, because that's like that sort of complexity and nuance and confusion works really, really well when you're trying to make something that's more of a conceptual art piece. But with something like this, which is concept art, clarity is sort of the name of the game. So like I would probably keep two levels of confusion here if I wanted to keep it into your point of like writing in the mechanics of it. It's like, oh, this could do double duty. Like, oh crap, this is actually just a clod of dirt, and it's going to fall apart when the players attack it. Or this thing is so ancient that it's covered in moss and it's covered in all sod, and it is one with the earth, which makes it incredibly dangerous. So it's like it could be the same thing, but like once it's defined in game terms, like to your point earlier, then mechanics can be written around it. Then like the story beats that like a player would use or a GM would use like are baked in. Um, but like beyond that, like I wouldn't want to like include like all the other things that I'd be inclined to include, like ruins and pipes, and making it be like all the things all at once. That's a different illustration. That is not a forest shark.
Yeah. So that's right, and that's I mean to your point about fine art. It's a different context. So it's trying to do a different thing. It has a different goal. And yeah, with game design, you're trying to like we were saying earlier. You're trying to achieve clarity, or you have to sometimes step backwards, not because it's bad or wrong and it might be cooler in your mind a certain way, but because it's got to serve a purpose as a tool for others to have fun. So it's always that question of just and there is a trend, and I think we can embrace that. And it's hard because I think we have all these goals in our heads of like, yeah, we want to make like the best version of X for GMs and players. But there is a version also where we just do publish like, well, whatever, that's just what Ethan drew. That's what that thing is. And even if it sort of purposefully doesn't match the tone of like a rule book with quarter page concept, chunks. And that can be fun. But, I think for the idea of like product lines and things that we want to play again and again ourselves, we're trying to kind of prove the model of like, can we do the standard, like, okay, you kind of get this idea. It's a known sort of genre of art in RPGs, the encounter sort of page where you get the art, the copy, and the GM can use it. The players can reference it if their character is supposed to know that. I've had children argue with me that the player, have the information, so their character should, and it's like very fun to have that discussion of like, okay, but would this imaginary person know this, or is this something because you're smart and you jumped ahead to the back of the book?
That's always would you consider that to be like an interesting debate within game spaces about like known knowledge versus unknown knowledge, or is it really just sort of like, oh, they're inexperienced players and it's fun?
No, it depends. It highlights that it's an arbitrary choice. So it's a choice that works, and there's reasons why people make games that way. That okay, your character wouldn't have that knowledge, but sure, you can read the book, of course. But I think it highlights that is only one way to do it. And you can imagine games where there isn't as much of a fleshed out mechanical encounter dynamic anyway, and all these things are more sort of narrative or improv, or they're more fluid, like the way that Apocalypse World talks about fronts. Like there's always like threats coming at you, but they're not like individual people matter that much. So like, yeah, you can probably like shoot a guy with your post-apocalyptic shotgun that shoots like a big harpoon or whatever, and kill that guy. But it's like, it's more that the front, there's a bunch of guys who keep coming, and that it's trying to model like Mad Max as opposed to like D&D Elric versus a shadow dragon from another dimension, kind of not one-on-one always, but sort of small squad skirmishes, right? Skirmishes versus then you have larger war games that do tactical warfare or faction level play where you're having to imagine thousands of people. So I think art plays into that, and that it's queuing up. I mean, if you just think of the kinds of art, Warhammer in those games, or any game that goes to the domain level, you have militaristic and just mobs of lots of little people art versus the heroic traditional D&D Brahm illustrations of like one badass with a sword versus one monster, quote unquote. And then you have more, NSR games and games that are more fluid and not about those kinds of combat experiences, don't tend to have encounter blocks at all. So in some ways, we're doing these throwback games a little bit with Stillfleet and SK, which are very similar in the level of crunch. Danse Macabre already is different. It doesn't have much of that. It's much more fluid in that sense of like, yeah, there's demonics, there's basically mutants, and here's how you can stat them out if one is encountered or a mob. But that's much more in keeping with zombie games like Red Markets or any zombie game. Whereas SK is more D&D like, in that it's like, let's think of one at a time, hundreds of fantastical beings to interact with. Why? Because that's fun and people like that. So we're in some ways, it's our version of a D&D, right?
Yeah, it's the just sort of like trying to take that energy, which is so delightful, like the deliciousness of like coming up with like the fabulation of like this and this and that, and like, what if this building moved, or like what if this armoire was alive. Those are my impulses anyway. And then just sort of trying to reframe it in a way that it's like, oh sure, well yeah, we own it because we've come up with new ideas, but it is sort of more like being like a little bit more mindful in two threads, which I think are very connected. And you've already alluded to this with how would combat work differently, or how would encounters work differently with like these three different options, and how would you mechanicalize it for narrative effects. Trying to like, I'm interested in not only like, oh, this is a cool creature and like you can attack it, but like it also has a bizarre place in a bizarre ecology. And to me, that's really interesting, both as a creator and a writer and an illustrator, to like come up with like, you can spin out pretty quickly in terms of like, oh crap, like, well, what is its like ecology like, and what questions does that ask or answer about the enchanted forest and like player stuff. But then you've got to sort of make decisions and give them to players. And I think that's really cool. I think that like part of the difficulty of Dragon Game, I've only played it, to be honest, at this point, like I've only really played 2 campaigns for a couple of years now. And it is super fun. Like I get the appeal of it. It is just sort of like there are certain kinds of limitations that are baked into it. I don't have to tell you, I'm just sort of talking. Like, you know, the political limitations, the capitalistic limitations, and then also like the sort of lack of mechanicalization of things that should have it. Like game mechanics should make you feel like the thing that you're trying to do. And that's narratively challenging and mathematically
Yeah.
challenging, but it's super duper great. And I
Yeah,
feel
it's
like
a
it really
question of
enriches. Yeah.
yeah, and also just where do you want to spend time as a designer, and in our case as artists. So what do you want to write? What do you want to draw? So I think one reason um, I imagine maybe this to pose it as a question that we keep doing to some degree games where there are these traditional encounter pages where it's like here's a monster you can fight with stats and cool art is because we like doing those things. You know, we like coming up with the ideas. You like doing the drawings. I mean, you know, if that's not true, tell me now live on the, on the
Yeah, yeah.
stream. But that's the sense
No.
I get, is that it's also just like a fun, we like kind of maximalist stuff, and coming up with a whole catalog of bestiary, a field guide. I mean, it goes back to medieval bestiaries, encyclopedias, visual encyclopedias, things that I think you and I share is kind of just stuff we love separate from games. But obviously you
Yeah.
can bring that to games too.
It is to your point. It's like the delight of lists, and then language, and then you know the wonderful thing about art is being able to like it can generate new language, because it prompts new ideas, and it can also flesh out ideas and language, and try and find ways to depict impossible things. Um, but like yeah, that encyclopedic kind of impulse is one that's very dear to me, um, from an artistic perspective, and also just sort of like making sense of the world, which can be very challenging.
Yeah.
Um,
We only have a few minutes left, but could you say, so you'd moved on to shading while we were kind of talking about the higher level design, like
yeah,
why do we do monsters? What is a monster? But you know, I think
why
it's
are we
interesting
monsters?
to tie it back to like the hand, you know. So like what are you doing
Yeah,
now is what I'm seeing is you're, and again, you put it in your own words, you're the expert, but you're shading and you're giving a sense of depth and texture, and it really brings to life to me immediately this as a three-dimensional as opposed to sort of very cartoony beast, even though to some degree it's very subtle. I mean, you're just adding sort of some gray here and there, but I think it definitely helps with sort of the feeling of roundness that a shark has, the sort of cigar shape. So yeah, any thoughts on sort of how you approach the transition from, okay, I did a sketch, to, okay, I'm going to start
yeah.
filling it, giving and bring it to life in a different way?
So like yeah, so this like I think that this is a stage that used to flummox me a lot, because you're opening up, like you've got to decide the use case of the thing. Is this a sketch that's in my sketchbook? Is it just, oh, this is a cool idea, I'll try another tack later, I've got the time. You know, like, oh crap, this is due like at 7 p.m. Those kind of decisions are sort of like, well, you know, at this point in time, I'm sort of like just playing around with volume because I haven't decided. Like, there's an interesting part right here because I like really want this to be like a gnarled branch, or like a gnarled root that comes around. So like there are ways, like the only ways to really depict that accurately would be to like maybe make this translucent go in and start doing a more complex layer of it. Another possibility would be like, you know, to really hammer it home, um, you know, I could go to like a watercolor brush, you know, throw a bunch more GPU at it and change the color. And that's sort of like, well, where is the color palette? It went away. What happened? And there we go. That's what I needed. So like the decisions that would happen next are really about, they're about time and intent and like use of the thing. Um, to really like right now just like wrap it up in a nice bow. I think doing something like this kind of gets the message like in the
Right.
most economical way possible. It's like if this is a color illustration and it's like we're trying to be like literal, and it's like defining like, yeah, this is a real
Yeah.
forest sky. It's going to have camouflage. It's not going to have a gray blue skin to hide in dark water. It's going
Right.
to
Right.
have, you know, green skin. Maybe it has chlorophylls or something, and it's going to be hiding in the
No, that
bush.
makes total sense. Yeah, instead of, I don't know, some sort of you know, underwater bacteria and little plankton and stuff, that it's interacting with things that would be in the forest, moss, and yeah, just algae and maybe, you know, lichens and fungi and stuff that are crewing on its skin and gives it camouflage, or might provide other, you know, eating dead skin cells off and, you know, kind of keeping it healthy. And there's sort of relationships there we can imagine that if a magically flying shark really existed. And that's, to me, I love that. That's part of the fun for me, speculative biology. I know other GMs don't care, and that's fine. But for me, coming at it as a, sort of from science, that's the fun part.
Right.
Taylor has one last question, and then so we don't have to end right at 1 by any means. We started a couple minutes late, but let's take this question, and then Ethan, you can talk us out. But I will say, just as a side comment before the question, I think this is really rad, and I think seeing 1 hour per monster, it's almost like a cool, one of those like NaNoWriMo.
Oh, totally.
Inktober,
I love that.
I think like if you did 1 per unit of monster for SK from now until whenever we actually launch the full
we'd have the
campaign,
bestiary.
you'd have easily, a bunch of stuff, and not all of it would, I mean, some of it you might want to zhuzh up or go back to, but I think a lot of it would be worth showing kind of as is. I think almost to be in keeping with the idea that it's a game that's coming to life from your notebooks and your fiction into, through the lens of the grid system into a playable game. It's not coming from competing with D&D or from even really high product design. It's really just what's in Ethan's notebook and what are the stories Ethan's been telling before, like you said, before you even started playing Stillfleet, which was your kind of entree into this world of math rocks. So I think it's cool, and I think it's fun to see what happens in an hour versus, as I know and we've talked about it before at Stillfleet, like how many hours you can put into those big cover illustrations, which are awesome and rad, but it's also fun to see what can get done in that constrained fashion. So, okay. Question. When you are ideating 200 fantastical creatures, I'm sure some things get discarded, fleshed out, or combined. What kinds of things are you considering when you're looking at building the bigger bestiary as a whole? What a good question. You and I kind of talked about this.
That's a great question.
Offline. So, Ethan, what any thoughts on ideating fantastical creatures? What do you flesh out, combine? What are your considerations as the lead designer?
I think that so it is sort of funny because I had done some game illustration and like a lot of commission work before starting Stillfleet. Stillfleet was sort of like my first really big rodeo with like stepping into art direction of that scope. I feel like it was one of those things that I sort of learned as I went along. For me, and it took me actually a while to really reflect on this. It was really only halfway through the book, like being like, oh crap. You can have lots of thoughts and like you can study things and you can go through notebooks and notebooks of like doing practice of anatomy and physiology and I think that like that sort of thing you shouldn't really do if you delight in it. For me, like each individual decision was really kind of based on like feelings, and like I had to like really make space for my own feelings about stuff and like get beyond like, oh, this is a bad drawing, I don't like this drawing. Versus I think more like what I was saying earlier on today of just like this makes me feel a certain way, and I need to find out why that shape makes me feel a certain way, because then I probably will want to draw a lot more of that shape. And I think that we in balancing all the stuff for the bestiary for or the encounter blocks for Stillfleet, which is just assault many. Part of it was like I think we started the process right by sort of going in and thinking about what it means to be like this sort of shabby, pre-modern super future, and then kind of come up with the colors and tones and shape language for that ahead of time. And then we just sort of did that across the whole book. And I think by the end of it, like a lot, like I'd improved and like a lot of shifts happened. But like, thank goodness we spent the time in the beginning sort of thinking about those particular kinds of purples and browns and flat shapes and what Tefnine architecture looks like versus Clank architecture.
Yeah.
Because that wound up really influencing like the different kinds of people. I am looking forward to going back this year and next year and sort of like zhuzhing up some of those drawings with all the stuff that I learned making those drawings.
We'll definitely cover that here, and I think that'll be fun for you as the lead, and also working with Tony and Chris at this point for the big Stillfleet relaunch and rethinking some of that. Obviously, there's things we're not going to lose, late Tefnian stuff being red or vaguely vampiric or zombie-like, but obviously some of those design decisions were very much based on taking things we played through in our games, and then later other GMs and Mike and others. And then thinking through it visually in a way that, maybe you'd been drawing sketches when we played, but it was very different when it's like, okay, I'm commissioning you to do art for a book. So, we had to, to your point, come up with a visual language and begin filling it in. And I think it's different with SK, but it is thinking about it, as you said it, similar in that there are blocks of kind of diegetic things we wanted to depict, and we had to figure out ways to kind of cue those up for the reader, teach the reader through the art. So in Stillfleet, it's different kinds of alien civilizations or earlier human, post-human civilizations. There's different kinds of, like we talked about the hell signs. How do you show invisible quantum manipulations, kind of magical stuff, but keep it very sci-fi as much as possible, and try to have it queue up more of the Black Rainbow Stranger Things vibe than a D&D vibe. And with SK, it's very different, right? It's like we can bring in the kind of D&D design language, but it's still your world. And so instead of, you know, the high Tefnians and late Tefnians and all these aliens, it's more a question of, okay, there's 4 islands with different seasons and different biomes, but we can't be too on the nose and boring about, you know, we have to kind of think through design language that both says spring or summer, but also introduces these wrinkles that make it very Ethan-like and coming from your brain and your stories as a GM. And so, you know, that summer has the giants, right? And sort of chaos. And there's sort of different vibes that, again, as a GM, you could say these things and we imagine them. And then when you're the artist also, you have to go and say, okay, what color is chaotic giant summer? You know,
Right.
What color are mountains and steppe plains and savannas versus, you know, spring having this very temperate, you know, very forested climate, and just think through, you know, what is each island like, and what are the kind of things that you want to draw that are fun about that. So I think that's one way to answer Taylor's question, is kind of these blocks, like you and I did that for SK, say we need roughly, let's be symmetric and just give each island the same number of basically monsters, NPC style encounters that aren't monstrous. And then ultimately you had the gradative movers and shakers. Let's provide a lot of bosses, kind of epic wizard types, because that does get at the feel of the game. And it's kind of how UGM is around each arc having kind of some magical bad person who is not necessarily evil, but something has gone awry. You know, so it's very comic booky, I think, in that sense of sort of the mad scientist losing, you know, control of the Faustian bargain. And I think that makes it feel both like D&D, but it's coming from a specific lens onto it that is less, you know, dragon oriented, lich oriented, and more about people, and almost more like Stillfleet in that sense, the dangers of power and of technology. In this case, the technology is magic, right? And the power is less, it's not about a company and kind of capitalism. It's about these, these sort of city states, these kingdoms. But I think that those are themes that we're both interested in. And I think your idea to kind of give each season have 4 groups of monsters, right? And then say, okay, we're also gonna have 4 groups of NPCs and 4 groups of kind of epic bad guys. I think that already just, you know, then you just start listing stuff and filling it in, right? And now visually we're just filling it in because we have these lists that we've agreed on that feel like, as a GM, yeah, that'll get me started. You know, if I have enough of each of those, I can kind of jump around and see the difference. So then it's a question of like, say, okay, well, what colors are associated here? You know, what lines are associated here? And that's really, you know, your wheelhouse. But you know, that process makes sense to me, and just sort of the logic of writing a book and basically producing a book, you know.
Yeah.
It is 105. So Ethan, final thoughts?
We're
Anything
all
you
set.
wanted to add or reflect? I think this is rad, and I think the idea of the twisting branch is subtle but definitely there, and also that sort of, I really like the kind of intestinal suspicious anatomy stuff. So
Oh yeah.
I think it's cool, little goopy, little horrific, and kind of all our art. I think that we again share that aesthetic, and I think, you know, Chris and Tony are a little similar in that way of just kind of liking a little bit of the bio horror with, you know, side of bio horror with whatever other genre we're doing. So anything in terms of a stopping place you want to sort of note? Now you're playing with blend and sort of different ways of accenting the illustration through basically, you know, digital manipulation of it, sort of, you know, having these big contrasts come out. So I don't know if you want to speak to kind of next steps here, what you would do next, you know, anything like that to end.
Yeah, I think that like the most technical thing that I would do next right now is sort of like, now I think I've like, this is the final stage of like, okay, this thing is more malicious than I thought it was going to be. I think that's just the shape of its mouth. It just came out that way. I really like the root and branch. I think I've sort of identified that it is going to be this color, and then it's up to players to sort of figure out, or if they want to, you know, is this just a clod of dirt that'll fall apart, or is it like a thing that is like camouflaged and dangerous? You know, and that's also like built into the game to have, like, you know, because a naturalist is a class, and, you know, adjuncts, you know, you could run an entire game just sort of exploring the ecology of the game. You wouldn't necessarily have to, you know, get embroiled in like a mad wizard's, you know, recovery from mental illness after accidentally unleashing like a sentient tower on people. You know, it could just simply be like, well, I've been hired to go like research all the dangers of the forest, and I think that in and of itself would be a perfectly fun game. Um, but like right now, just the most technical thing I would do is, I think I've got a color palette I like, and I've got shapes that I like. I want to go back in, and that's what I was doing with this stuff. My next step would be to like really make choices about volume, like definitive choices, since I've decided to make this one color. of just like, okay, this is a cylinder, like this is a lozenge, like it goes backwards here. Really kind of like answer all the questions that are ambiguous about the shape of it, and then that way I can leave the details being ambiguous because I've defined all the other stuff. Like you can get away with a lot more of like little flourishes and greebles and roots and like spatters and stuff if like the overall shape and volume of it is like more determined. So that probably would be like my final step of this thing before wrapping it up.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's that.
That makes total sense, and I like that, and I like that a lot for sort of the speed aspect of having to do a lot of these, which is we don't need every detail ironed out. It's going to be printed, in
At a
high
very small
quality,
size,
but a
yeah.
very small size, right? So yeah, it's much more. Is it representing? And I've had so many conversations about this because we're both interested very philosophically in kind of these regimes in art. What are you representing? And you're representing speculative things that don't exist, and what's important to take away as a GM, and how do we use these books? And you were talking about using them really for art reference before you ever played an RPG, which I think was so interesting. And for me, it was always like, oh, I don't, I'll describe it my own way. I'll change it, but I liked kind of having the ideas for telling stories. So I think it's a great place to leave it, which is, you're always ultimately focused on balancing time and getting across those key concepts that people are going to use. And how much do you need to fill in versus what are things you can kind of leave ambiguous, and that can be part of the fun and part of the art is making those decisions. And I'm sure other people approach it differently, but I feel like you and I have kind of aligned on this strategy for the couple games we've been doing for a while now. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to 1994 Street Sharks from Amazing Adventures by Mattel.
Yeah. Wow.
Another show designed to promote a toy line. And yeah, Taylor, thanks for your great questions. Thanks to anybody who's tuning in, and we'll be back in a couple weeks, if not sooner. And if there's anything you'd like to see from Ethan or anybody else art-wise here, let us know. And yeah, we will keep sharing some of our process just because, hey, we have to draw stuff anyway, and it's kind of fun. So thanks a lot. And come on the Discord and tell us, play some games. Make Ethan run some games of this for you. It's my suggestion.
Just bully me into doing it, and I'll do it.
All right, I'm going to click end stream. Thanks, Ethan.
All right, peace.
Bye-bye.